Imagine, if you will, two patients diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. Patient 1 is prescribed 10 milligrams of brand name glucotrol, while patient 2 is prescribed an equal dose of generic glipizide. Over the course of 1 month, patient 1 pays $200, while patient 2 only pays $16. Both hypoglycemic drugs contain the same active ingredients and are equally effective, yet one costs over 10 times as much as the other. Despite this, many people end up paying 10 times as much for the same drug without realizing it, while others choose to overpay in the belief that generic drugs are inferior. According to a study conducted on diabetic Medicare patients, 35.3% opted for brand name hypoglycemics over the generic. But why? The answer lies in both consumer misinformation and shady big pharma marketing practices. To understand why brand name drugs are dispensed when cheaper generics are available, we must first understand generic substitution. Generic substitution laws require pharmacies to substitute brand name drugs for their generics whenever possible, unless otherwise noted. While these laws have been successful at reducing costs to consumers, physicians and patients can get around these laws through what are called dispense as written designations. These designations require pharmacies to fill prescriptions exactly as the doctor requests them, even if it means prescribing an expensive brand name over a cheaper generic. According to a study published by the American Medical Association, nearly 5% of prescriptions were designated as dispense as written. While 5% may not seem significant, it is a problem when you consider the fact that these designations are not always requested by patients. In many cases, patients are prescribed brand name drugs by their physicians, unaware a cheaper generic is available. The incentive for prescribing brand names over generics lies in a practice known as pharmaceutical detailing, a controversial marketing strategy that pharmaceutical companies use to sell more product. Just as software companies hire salesmen to sell their product, pharmaceutical companies hire detailers to educate doctors about their drugs and persuade them into prescribing them. Pharmaceutical detailing can range from providing doctors with free meals and medical textbooks to paying them hundreds of thousands of dollars in speaker fees for promotional talks. According to a study published by ProPublica in 2013, more than 2,500 doctors had received payments of at least $500,000 in the past 5 years. And of the 1.1 million doctors in the United States, 1 million had received payment of some sort. After reading these statistics, it is no wonder that 9 out of 10 big pharmaceutical companies spend less on research and development than on marketing and sales, and for good reason. On average, physicians who received gifts of any sort, whether it be a meal or a cash payment, tended to prescribe brand name drugs more often than those who didn't. An example of this comes from a 2014 study that explored the influence of cash payments from AstraZeneca on the prescription rates of their brand name drug Arimidex. Arimidex, an aromatase inhibitor used to treat breast cancer, costs on average $1,714 for a month's supply. On the other hand, the generic anastrozole costs, on average, between $30 and $90 for the same supply. The study found that doctors who received large payments from AstraZeneca were 19% more likely to prescribe Arimidex over the generic. The results of this study bring the ethics of such practices into question. Essentially, pharmaceutical companies take advantage of patients by bribing doctors into writing prescriptions for their brand name drugs, not only costing patients more money, but taxpayers as well. Another way in which pharmaceutical companies maximize profits is by preventing generics from reaching the market in one of two ways. The first method involves paying drug manufacturers to delay the release of a generic drug, costing Americans an estimated $3.5 billion a year. The other way Big Pharma avoids competition is by extending the patents on their drugs. Drug companies are granted 20-year patents as compensation for developing new drugs, during which no other company can develop a generic. These patents can be extended by 3 years if the company discovers another use for the same drug, and in some cases can be extended for small things such as changing the design of the packaging. The result is that this lack of competition allows drug companies to raise prices without consequences. One of the most popular examples of this price gouging is the EpiPen, a potentially life-saving device used by over 3 million Americans. The EpiPen is protected by patents until 2025, and since 2007, its manufacturer Mylan has raised prices from $50 to over $300 for one injector. With little to no price regulations, Mylan's price hiking has cost consumers millions of dollars and left many Americans unable to afford their prescriptions. When you consider the potentially deadly consequences of not being able to afford an EpiPen, it is clear that Big Pharma's abuse of the U.S. patent system harms low-income populations the most. As people experiencing poverty are increasingly unable to pay for their prescriptions, they will be put at a greater disadvantage with preventable health issues, a problem that can easily become generational. However, a large part of the problem lies in consumer misinformation. According to a national survey, 46% of patients surveyed requested a brand name drug over the generic at least once in the past year. One might assume that only middle and upper class individuals choose to spend more for the brand name, but that is not always the case. Many lower income individuals choose to overpay for brand name medications out of an unfounded distrust for generics. In 2011, a study found that perceptions of generic drugs among a rural African community in Alabama were overwhelmingly negative. Not only did most respondents believe that generic drugs caused more side effects and were less effective than brand name, many participants, quote, used brand name diabetes medications despite reporting limited income. Another study conducted among low-income individuals in Texas corroborated the results of the Alabama survey, finding that African Americans were, quote, 10 times as likely to agree that generic drugs have more side effects than brand name drugs. In many cases, Medicare covers the entire cost of generic drugs, yet people still choose to pay out of pocket for brand names, believing that they are of higher quality, a belief which is unsupported by years of clinical research. In fact, all generic drugs must contain the same active ingredient and be approved by the FDA to be equal in quality to the brand name. Though the exact causes of this distrust for generic drugs are unclear, factors such as advertising and misinformation are likely to blame. Spreading awareness of the effectiveness of generic drugs could go a long way towards preventing impoverished people from overpaying for their medicine. Between negative attitudes towards generics and the effects of pharmaceutical detailing, Americans spent around $73 billion extra on brand name drugs between 2010 and 2012, money that could have gone to other necessities, such as rent or groceries. When you consider the fact that in 2019, 22.9% of Americans experienced medication insecurity, it is easy to see how manipulative marketing strategies can have harmful consequences on impoverished populations. Furthermore, awareness must be spread about the effectiveness of generic drugs in order to put money back into people's pockets and prevent them from having to make tragic choices. Health is a human right, and as long as Big Pharma continues to abuse patents and pay off doctors, people experiencing poverty will be deprived of this right.